But yeah, it should be interesting. See, I mean, it might be it. I mean, we go till 12:30, 1 o'clock before we're home,
Yeah.
with the 11 o'clock service ending at
Yeah. So you
midnight.
get home.
So by the time we get home and everything, we're just exhausted. And
You
usually,
don't. You're not one to. You don't need to get up Christmas morning and.
no, no, and because when we get home, we have to unwind for a little bit. So
Yeah.
you don't go right to bed. So we usually turn the TV on, watch something that's on, and for a little bit, and then crash. And so it'll be nice to sleep in the morning, not have to be anywhere or do anything or be on or make sure everybody's coming over to open gifts, because that will all be done. And gifting this year is different. I mean, everybody's getting like different kinds of gifts this year. Like we're just basically giving Zach money.
He was saying Zach's going to be hiking or something, and
Yeah.
she was and
Yeah.
she bought him like a puffer coat that like
Yeah.
shrinks
Right.
down.
Yeah. Yeah. You can put it into a little bag, and then she bought him a pair of hiking boots. So,
Hey,
yeah.
I laughed because I said, would he think of something like that kind of jacket? No.
No.
Mom
He-
would though.
He probably would have worn a pair of sneakers and a regular old coat and thought he was going to be fine. So, all right. So we're going to jump into this study tonight, and kick off. I'm gonna, because the band is going to rehearse, I'm going to close that door, and we'll see if we can hear from that door. Though, if not, I'll leave it open. But we're going to talk about the gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus. And I said last week we were going to talk about gold, frankincense, and myrrh. 2 weeks ago, actually, we were off last week. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I'm going to do that. I promise I'm going to do that. But I'm going to do that primarily next week. We're going to get into the gift a little bit tonight. But as I started studying this, I really began to realize that I can't talk about the gifts without first talking about the wise men and who they are, what they did, and where they're from, and just to give some information about them, because there's all kinds of different information about them, right? I mean, we sing "We Three Kings from Orient Are." So, were there three? Are they from the Orient? Well, actually, no. And so we'll take a look at that. We're going to take a look at all of the things that surround the wise men. We're going to read. We're going to actually be in a singular passage, a singular place called Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, the first 12 verses are all about the visit of the wise men. And then following that, we get some information on from history, the historical kind of aspects of the Bible. Give us this information about Herod killing children in the Bethlehem area, trying to find Jesus and get rid of him. And so we're going to talk about that too, and how that helps inform us about the wise men also. So we're going to take a look at the wise men, or what are otherwise known as the Magi. And so we're going to do that tonight. I want to pray for us as we get ready to do this, and ask God to open our minds and to fill us with His Word tonight. Heavenly Father, we thank You for Your Word. We thank You for Your wisdom. We thank You for Your guidance and Your direction in our lives. And we ask, Lord, that whatever we learn tonight, that it would stick in our heads, that we would allow that information to rest there, and it would be a part of our collective knowledge about You. And so we ask, Lord, tonight, fill our hearts, fill our minds with Your Word, and give us information tonight that helps us be the believers You want us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Well, they came from somewhere, and they came from somebody. Somebody delivered them. And the history, the story for us is this, that they came from these people we like to call wise men. And wise men, the term wise men, comes from a Greek word, which is interesting, right? So we call them wise men, men because it's multiple. But the word is magi, which is, I think, a fantastic word. Let me just double check my spelling. That's right. Yep. Magi. This is, or magi is how we spell it. So This is the Greek letters, M-A-G-O-I, magi. We English that into magi. And magi, the translation of the Greek word magi means wise men. That's where we get all these different words. So are they magi? Are they wise men? Yes, they are both. And one is the Greek word, one is the English translation of the word magi. And we know that because in other places where the word magi has been used, not just in the Bible, there's one other place in the Bible where it's used over in the book of Acts, but also in other historic writings, the word magi is used, and it's always used to describe people who are wise, or wise people who are informers to oftentimes the court of the king. So these wise men sit in the court of the king. And so they are not the king. The wise men themselves are not the king. They are the people who inform the king and give the king information. And so their job is to be personal advisors for the king, or for kings. Sometimes they work in different courts in different. And in our situation, we have multiple wise. We have wise men. We have plural, and so we know they're coming from different places, different kingdoms, and they somehow have managed to gather themselves together and make this journey to Bethlehem, coming from different kingdoms. Now, their job, primarily as wise men, is to read the stars. They are what we like to. There's two different words. So there's astrologer, and there's astronomy. Now, an astrologer is one who reads the stars and makes predictions. And a person who studies astronomy studies the physics of stars. And so they're looking at things like gravity and how many, what's the light years on a star and things like that. So this is much more scientific. This is much more mystical. So we've got this mystical and scientific. And these guys, these magi, play in both of these worlds. So they're watching the stars, they're watching what they're doing, they're looking and they're observing, they're out at night, and because they believe that the stars direct us. Now, some of that is obviously a more pagan thought process. And these are people who don't necessarily believe in the God of Israel, but they do believe that there is a supreme being. There are gods, and those gods tend to direct and guide the heavens. And so you can look into the heavens and you can see. And so we get ancient Greek and ancient Roman constellations in the sky, because they would look up and they would see their gods in the sky. And so there's this ongoing relationship between wise men and the stars. And they're looking at the stars and they're making decisions and they're informing the king, hey, king, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing, planets starting to align, and if those planets align, then this might happen or this could happen. And those are the kinds of things that these magi are doing for the king. They're informing the king of in effect, what's up. They're saying, this is what's going on in the heavens, and this is what's happening, and so you better be aware of what's going on. And so Herod has wise men in his court, and he's going to call on them. I want to read from Matthew chapter 2. I want to read these 12 verses, and then I want to jump into some of the things going on here. It says, after Jesus was born. So this isn't, they're not, here's our complication. We put Jesus, Mary, Joseph in the stable, and we put the shepherds with some sheep, and it says over in Luke that they left the sheep and went down to see Jesus, so there shouldn't be any sheep there. Unless whoever owns the stable has sheep in there, maybe that's the case. And then it says, and then we put the wise men all in the stable all at the same time. We mash them all up all at the same time. Probably didn't happen that way. It says after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Now notice, they don't go to Bethlehem, they go to Jerusalem. It says they go to Jerusalem and ask the question, where is this king who is supposed to be born? We saw his star. So they start circulating this news, and this news makes it to Herod. And Herod heard, it says, when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Making sense, right? I mean, it makes sense that your whole city, like, if somebody came to Harrisburg and started saying, hey, I heard a king's has been born. Do you know where he's at? Everybody might make the news. It might make the evening news. They might talk about it on ABC, CBS, NBC, local, whatever. And it's got the city in a little bit of an uproar. And it says, when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, which is his collection of wise men, right? That's Herod's informers. Those are the people who are telling Herod or informing Herod of what's going on. He asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. So these wise men inform Herod this is what's going on. We know for a fact that the Old Testament prophecy is telling us Bethlehem's the place where he's going to be born. So Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So this is the story of the wise men. It's only told in Matthew. Mark does not tell the story. Luke does not tell the story. John does not tell the story of the wise men. Only Matthew does. Only Matthew tells that story. Now, that being said, only Luke tells the story of the shepherds. Matthew doesn't tell that story. So it's just kind of interesting. Mark does not tell the birth story at all. And John's version of the birth story is the light came into the world and the world didn't know the light. And so it's not the birth narrative we get in Matthew and Luke. But Matthew and Luke give us different perspectives. And Matthew really wants us to know that the king was born. He is the king. Luke really wants to know us to know that Jesus is the Lord of the common person. So he focuses in on the story of the shepherds. Matthew wants to make sure that we all understand Herod and Judaism as it is now done for, because the king has now come. The king of Israel, he's going to put Israel back on the market. He's going to make us back as the people of God. This is the one who's been forecast. He's more interested in the Old Testament prophecies. And so Matthew is really speaking to a Jewish audience, making sure the Jews understand who Jesus is. And so he's focusing on this kingdom picture, and he wants to make sure that we understand that this king, our king, Jesus, was recognized by other kings in the world. And so these other kings in the world who their wise men, their magi, say, hey, something's going on. There's this incredible thing happening out there, and we don't understand it. You know, there's this star that's shining in the east, and we don't understand what's going on with the star. But it's got this long tail, and for some reason, it keeps pointing to this little town, right? And so we're going to head out, we're going to take off, we're going to go over and see what's going on, because this star is the identifier of the birth of a king. Something big has happened, and we're going to go check it out. We have no idea how many wise men there were and exactly where they came from. It says that they are from the east. Now, most likely based on the gifts that they bring, the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, they are most likely from what we understand to be modern-day Iran or Persia. The Persian Empire is a vast empire and had created trade routes for gold, and they have gold mines in Persia, and their trade routes connected them with northern Africa, where frankincense and myrrh come from, and the Arabic Peninsula, where frankincense and myrrh comes from. So they've got all these connections. Persia has all these connections already. most likely no one's coming from further east than that. We sometimes will make it sound like, that they're from the Orient, they're from China or Japan or Asia and some Far East Asia, and that's not true. As it was, coming from modern day Iran or Persia, they had an 800 to 900 mile trip to make, which says to us that if the star showed upon the birth of Jesus, that most likely they are not showing up the next day. They're not popping in the next day. The star pops up, comes up, says the birth has happened. They start their 800 to 900 mile journey. It's going to take them a while to do that journey. It's going to take them a long time to make that journey. They're going to travel somewhere. We'll talk about the mode of transportation in a second, but it's going to take them, they're going to make about 20 miles a day at best. And so depending on the weather, depending on the circumstances that they find themselves in and the terrain and everything they've got to navigate, it's going to take them quite a while. We don't know how long it took them to recognize the star, to talk to each other, to tell the king, hey, king, your wise men need to go do this. Can you release us to go? Can we get all the supplies together? All the things we need to do to make this trip. We're going to take camels with us as pack horses, which, by the way, they probably did not ride camels. If you've ever ridden a camel, it's not a comfortable ride. These are wise men in the courts of the king, and most likely they are riding horses. They're not riding camels. They're taking camels with them to carry the load, because that's what camels did back then. We know historically camels were used more as pack animals. Horses are used for transportation. So it's kind of interesting. We put these wise men on 3 camels, right? We got 3 wise men. We don't know if there were 3. We don't know if there was. We know there's at least 2, right? Because it's plural. The word is plural. This oi at the end means it's plural, so it's wise men. It's magi. It's not a singular wise person. It's or wise man. It's a group of at least 2 because it's plural, and probably more than that. Some people say it could have been as many as 12 from 3 different courts, 4 from each court. So who all came together from different kingdoms within Persia and gathered their resources together to make this trip together. Why? Because it's safety in numbers. When you're traveling that distance, you could be robbed, you could be sacked, you could be ambushed, all that kind of stuff. So this is probably a fairly decent sized caravan of somewhere between 10 and maybe 30 different people, because they're going to bring servants with them. They're going to bring the cook with them. They're going to bring all the different people. Who knows? They could have brought washerwomen with them. They could have brought their wives with them. We don't know. They're going to make a journey, and they're going to be gone for a while. They could be gone for as long as a year making this journey. It could take them several months to put all their resources together, to take the journey for 3 or 4 more months, make the journey to Bethlehem, have this conversation, or Jerusalem, have this conversation with Herod, figure out, okay, we've got to go down to Bethlehem now. That's another 6 miles. Let's travel down there. That's going to take us another day to get down there. We get down to Bethlehem. We finally find Jesus. It says once they find him, he is in a house. It says that he's in a home. It says in verse 11, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother. He's no longer in a stable. He's no longer out back in the stable. It's been months since Jesus was born. And so he is no longer in a stable. They've settled into the house somewhere, probably December. They're not ready to travel with the baby yet. We're not going to take the baby out and go traveling, because it's going to take them days, if not about a week, Bethlehem back up to Nazareth. That's not an easy journey. And we have no record that Mary rode on a donkey. She could have had to walk that whole distance. She's got to make her way back. Nowhere does it say in the Bible that Mary rode on a donkey all the way down from Nazareth to Bethlehem. It just says that they made the journey. We assume that she probably, as a pregnant woman, didn't walk the whole distance. We're thinking probably not, right? But we make assumptions, and that's what I wanted to make sure we talk about tonight. Who are these wise men as they bring these gifts? What we do is, because there are, let me get my eraser. Because there are 3 gifts, what we end up doing is we end up saying there must have been 3 wise men, right? 3 gifts, 3 wise men. And so we have this song, We Three Kings, which, as you catch from everything I've said, they're not kings. They're in the court of the king as his advisors. So they're not the king. So when we sing We Three Kings from Orient Are, we're really taking liberties with what the Bible is telling us is going on here. But what we've done historically is we have named the 3 of them. So the first one is I want to make sure I spell this right. Melchior, Caspar, or some people it's Gaspar. And then the last one is Balthazar. Or some people put a Z, Balthazar. So tradition, after the Bible is written, tradition comes down that this is the names of the 3 wise men. Interesting, right? There's nothing in the Bible that gives us these names. This is tradition after the Bible's written that doesn't make it into the Bible. And so we've got this tradition of the 3 wise men, and we actually even know their names. But we have no biblical evidence that these are the names of the 3. We have no evidence that there were only 3. What they do say is that Melchior is from Arabia, or what we know as modern day Persia. Caspar is from Sheba. So let's do this. Persia, Sheba, the land of Sheba, and Egypt. That Balthazar is from Egypt. And that they come bringing gifts based on what's popular in their regions. So we've got gold in Persia, frankincense in Sheba, and myrrh in Egypt coming. Now I want to unpack that a little bit more, but there's still more to talk about when we look at these 3 who are from the east, right? Because here's what's interesting. It says here, and I find this really interesting. It says, after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Now that's suggesting to me that the star is moving, right? It says it went ahead of them and then stopped in a certain place. Now these astrologers are figuring out, they're angling it, they're saying, well, this star keeps moving on us, and it keeps moving on us. So the suggestion, the idea from astrologists and astronomers, scientists and mystics from the time period have gone back and taken a look, and the astronomers have given us some really great information. What we know is that in 7 BC, Jupiter and Saturn aligned in the constellation Pisces. And Pisces, when they aligned, had this kind of picture of a tail coming down off of these 2 planets that had aligned themselves together. And as we both know, as you and I both know, and as the people who are watching know, planets move. Planets move. They align at some point, and then they because they're all moving around the sun like we are. So planets move in the sky, unlike stars. Stars are stationary, right? But planets move. You look up and, oh, that's Venus, but then Venus is over here, and then it's over here, and then it's over here. The stars move. And so the idea possibly is that it's the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, which in ancient days, Jupiter and Saturn were the representations of rulers. They were the big planets. They were the ruling planets, right? And Pisces was a representation of Israel. We know that historically Israel and Pisces are given this sense of representation. And so with 2 planets aligning, you would get this brighter, unique light, and then the kind of the tail of Pisces would give you this image of a tail pointing down to Bethlehem, or moving and making it all the way over to Bethlehem, where it says it stopped and rested there. Now the other possibility astrologically is that it was a supernova or it was a comet, both of which die. And so They know, but they know in 7 BC. Now, what's interesting about 7 BC is that we know, based on calendar errors over the centuries, that most likely Jesus is not born in the year 0. He's probably born somewhere around the year 5 or 6 or 7 BC. He's actually born back then. And we know some of that because we know when Herod ruled and we know when Herod died. And we know that Jesus is born and then he goes down to Egypt for a while. Herod dies. He has to come back from Egypt. All of that happened before 0 BC. We know that historically. So we know that Jesus was probably born before somewhere around 5 BC or before. Well, that might work perfectly with 7 BC and the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn. So there's lots of people who have these ideas that all of that alignment is there on purpose because that's what was going on. That they're looking at the alignment of 2 planets in the constellation Pisces, and that's pointing them down to Bethlehem as it moves because they're following that movement of those 2 planets. Now, that being said, what we also know is this. We know that these men are pretty darn smart. They know how to travel. They know how to make their way. If they're traveling 800 to 900 miles to get where they need to go, we know that these guys are pretty smart. We know that they're traveling in a rather large group for safety reasons, but also because there's probably more than just 3 wise men. They're traveling with all their servants and all the other additional people around them that they need to travel. So what we know is they're pretty smart, but what we also recognize is something unique. It says, when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Verse 4 says, when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them about where Jesus is supposed to be born, and they tell him Bethlehem. And then in verse 7 it says, so he secretly called these magi in to have a conversation with them. In other words, Herod believed in these guys and their wisdom. He recognized their position and their status in the world that he lived in. So it would be the equivalent of the right-hand person to a high-level leader popping into our house, and we'd recognize his position. Well, this guy is in this position because he's pretty smart. He's there for a reason. And so Herod recognizes the position of these wise men and calls them in to ask them questions. They're going to figure Herod out. They're going to figure out he's not the good guy that he's trying to be. Tell me where he's at. I want to go worship him too. And they're like, no. We're not going to tell you anything. And thank heavens they didn't, because it would have been the end of Jesus at his birth. Now, unfortunately, what does happen, and what gives us some time frame here, is that it says once they returned that Jesus' life is threatened. And so Mary and Joseph take him down to Egypt to hide. Herod is upset, and so it says he got up, Then Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi. He was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had heard from the Magi. So in other words, that's why we get this idea that it could be that the Magi visited anywhere from several months to almost a full 2 years before the Magi got to visit Jesus. I think it's probably less than that. It's probably within that first year. But Herod's playing it safe. He's like, well, just kill everybody 2 years and over. That way we can make sure we definitely get them, kind of thing. And so the Roman soldiers do the dirty work of Herod and kill all the children, all the boys 2 years old and under, in order to make sure that this king doesn't survive. Because Herod is crazy. He's crazy. He's crazy with power. He's going to kill more people than you can shake a stick at, including some of his own family members. He's going to have some of them drown, and he's eventually going to kill his own wife because he feels threatened by her and his power. So Herod's just a wackadoodle, and thank heavens the wise men didn't believe him and veered away from them. But unfortunately, he still went bonkers. It's again, verse 16. It says, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and so out of that rage, he just decides, I'm going to kill every child, every boy child 2 years old and under. Gives us this idea that these wise men, when they traveled, could have traveled anywhere from the time of the birth to a full 2 years. Now, most likely, Mary and Joseph are not going to get up and travel back to Nazareth right away. They're going to let the baby mature a bit. But they do flee rather quickly, and that's why we also believe that this child's probably at least a year old or so, and able to travel all the way down to Egypt. That's going to be a long journey, but it's going to be one that's necessary because, one, that's far enough away. Herod can't reach down to Egypt to get him. And two, there's an Old Testament prophecy that says that he will call his son up out of Egypt. And so Jesus is also fulfilling that prophecy, which I think is fantastic. The visit is a sign of the importance of the birth of a king. And they bring with them the signs of homage and the signs of recognition of the status of Jesus as a king. And those are gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So next week we're going to talk about the representations and the symbols that those three things have as these wise men come and bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Why did they choose those three? And what were their symbolic reasons for choosing those three? So now we know who the wise men are. We don't know how many. We know maybe some of them by name, Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. And but we know that they made a long journey. We know that they're probably from somewhere in the Persia, modern-day Iran area, from the Persian Empire, and they're recognizing within their kingdoms, they're recognizing something massive has happened, something has taken place, and their kings have released them to go find out what's going on. They're going to return back to that kingdom of Persia. Now, one of the last things I want to say, and I'm starting to run out of time here because there's so much going on, but one of the things that I think is really important is that you really have to go back in the Old Testament and you have to piece some things together. But Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are all captive in Persia. And Daniel prophesies that there is a king to be born in Israel when he's living in Persia. And so it's possible that the stories of Daniel, remember, Daniel was put as second in charge under Nebuchadnezzar when Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego all served the Lord and survive it. They survived the lion's den, they survived the fiery furnace. Daniel's able to tell Nebuchadnezzar his dreams, and Nebuchadnezzar ends up putting Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in charge of much. And so their story is part of the history of Persia. And so if you go back and read Daniel, the book of Daniel, Daniel prophesies while he's there that there will be a king born in Israel. And so they probably wrote down at some point there's a king coming. Make sure you look to the west because there's a king coming over there somewhere. And all of a sudden the star appears, this alignment, right? And they go, hey, I wonder if this is what Daniel was talking about. Let's go find out. Let's go find out. Balaam, who, remember, Balaam's donkey was the one who talked to him, right? Balaam also prophesies that there will be a king born in that land as well, in the land of Joseph. And so he understands very clearly and prophesies, and he's also speaking in the region of Persia as well. So they have historical record from prophets who are saying at some point you better be looking at the west because there's going to be a king born over there. And I wonder if these wise men didn't know that piece of prophecy, didn't have their thumb on that page as they were looking through and going, oh, wait, over here, okay, some time ago, hundreds of years ago, this guy named Daniel and this guy named Balaam both prophesied. Maybe we should go check that out. And so I think that's a unique piece that we miss, that there's an Old Testament prophecy in the land in which they come from Daniel and from Balaam, that might have kick-started their journey. So all that being said, they put together the gifts that represent their kingdoms, and they head out to find the king and to recognize him by giving them their gifts and giving that king their worship. So next week we'll talk about the gifts. There we go. So we're going to do that next week. We're going to do all three gifts next week: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I'm going to talk really fast because there's a lot of information there. And then Julie and I are going to go on vacation. We're going to take a week off. So for those of you who are watching, we are not going to be doing the week of, I think it's the 15th. My calendar is behind the TV back here. Let me see real quick. It is, yes, December 15th is the Wednesday. And so we'll do next week yet, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then Wednesday, the 15th, the Christmas week, we will not have a Bible study. And the week between Christmas and New Year's, we will not be having Bible study there. We'll resume study back after the first of the year. Next week, we will do gold, frankincense, and myrrh and wrap up the year 2021 with those gifts. All right, that's what we got. It's great to see you tonight. Thank you for being here in person. I truly enjoy having somebody to talk to. Thank you so very much. And take care. God bless, and good night, everyone.
It's a little easier when there's someone here.
There is. It's true.